Welcome to Oxford Bookstore's Digital Conversations. We bring to you this very special book, The Great Hindu Civilization, by none other than the very well-known Pavan Varma. The book is published by Westland Publications and it is available at Oxford Bookstores. Pavan Kumar Varma is a writer, diplomat, and was till recently an MP in Rajya Sabha. He was earlier advisor to the Chief Minister of Bihar with the rank of Cabinet Minister. He has been India's ambassador in several countries, also director of the Nehru Center in London, official spokesperson of the Ministry of External Affairs and press secretary to the President of India. Author of over a dozen successful books, Pavan K. Varma was conferred an honorary doctoral degree for his contribution to the fields of diplomacy, literature, culture, and aesthetics by the University of Indianapolis in 2005. He was also conferred the Druk, Bhutan's highest civilian award in 2012. In conversation with Mr. Pavan Varma, today we have Pragya Tiwari. Pragya is a writer and journalist who has edited and written for both national and international publications. She is the co-founder of the Indian History Collective and creative director of Ojo Media. Over to you, Pragya, to take the discussion forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Oxford Bookstores, for this opportunity. And thank you all for listening to us and for being here this evening. One is always looking forward to a new book by Pavanji, but this book that we're here to speak about is one that I have been particularly eagerly awaiting, and having read it, devoured it rather, in one go. All I'm going to say is that it is an absolute must read. And I know that that phrase has become a bit of a cliche and it's, sort of thrown around liberally. So I'm going to give you a sort of put my money where the mouth is. So if you have any complaints with the book when you buy it, if you don't like it, then you can reach out to me. It's a personal guarantee, but seriously, it's a highly important book. At least that's the way I see it, particularly as an anchor at this juncture of our history. And what that means, I'm hopeful that you will be able to unpack, or rather we'll be able to help you unpack over the next 40 odd minutes as Pavanji talks to us a little bit more about the book. Pavanji, welcome, namaskar, and congratulations for yet another fantastic book. I'm going to start by asking you a very basic question, which is, what do we speak of when we speak of the Hindu civilization? The reason I'm starting with this very sort of rudimentary question is because there is a fair degree of fog and even contestation when it comes to locating this in the sort of historical and geographical context. And in fact, you raise the question whether the great Hindu civilization in your first chapter is a myth or reality. So a little bit about what do we speak of when we speak of the Hindu civilization.
Look, to my mind, thank you, Pragya, for your kind words. And to come to your question straight away, I also want to place on record my appreciation for Oxford Bookstore for hosting this interaction. Now, to come to your question, of course, I strongly believe that there is something verifiable which is called a Hindu civilization. I believe this civilization is marked by great antiquity, continuity, peaks of remarkable refinement, diversity, assimilation. And I believe that those who question its existence do so on argumentation and facts which cannot be sustained against the sheer massive evidence for this civilization. Now, what are the arguments that are raised sometimes? And I discussed them in the first chapter, as you said. First, people cavil, and I'm talking of established historians, about the fact that whether there is a word called Hindu. I demolished that argument. Megasthenes in the 4th century BC referred to a group of people in a defined geographical zone identified by a common civilizational crucible, who are called Hindus. as well by the Persians, by Arabs, by Chinese. Even otherwise, it does not matter whether people self-consciously claim a name. The fact that they were Hindus is not in doubt. Then there is the question of whether this was indeed a civilization. There are historians who say that we have had no civilization. This have been just the crossroads of history. I refute that argument to the best of my ability. Then people say, if there was such a civilization, why not call it Buddhist? And I say, with great respect for Buddhism, that Buddhism itself was an offshoot of Hinduism, that there is considerable overlap between the two religions, that there was never a situation of absolute acrimony between the two religions, Buddhism and Hinduism, and Jainism and Hinduism as well, and that they were therefore religions of great merit and worldwide following, but which originated in India under the larger template of Hinduism and as offshoots of it. Then there are questions that are raised, such as that by Wendy Doniger, who says, can we use the word Hinduism in the singular? According to her, Hinduism is like a cross between a hedgehog and a tortoise. In other words, it is beyond the definition because of its inherent diversity. I thought religions should be lauded for the diversities that they nurture, not pilloried for their absence. Hinduism, in spite of its many diversities, has indeed a central narrative and is Hindu and is therefore very much possible to be labeled in capital H and the singular. Then there are historians who want to see the entire evolution of history only in Marxist terms, which essentially means economic categories, serfdom or feudalism, and are therefore uh, deliberately insensitive to notions of religion, spiritualism, culture, aesthetics, and therefore don't wish to recognize a civilization. That I refute them. Then there are those who question the ancient antiquity of Hinduism because, and I will come to the reasons why all these arguments are ultimately made, even by knowledgeable people. They question the antiquity, but I provide facts and evidence why the current notions of history about the antiquity of the civilization need to be predated at least by a millennium, if not more, which places it among the most ancient civilizations of the world. Therefore, Therefore, I believe that a civilization exists, and the reason why at least some of the people, including Amartya Sen and Romila Thapar, who do not wish to give credit to the verifiable achievements of this civilization, is because they believe that in doing so they may assist those who over glorify Hinduism in the ultra Hindu right today. And I say that these are two separate arguments. One is you need to combat extremisms of all kinds today, including within Hinduism. The other is to give credit to what is legitimate and verifiable in the past. And to mix the two is to do injustice to a great civilization.
This is a thread that will, this might thread the conversation over and over again. This is a point that might come up again later. But starting from the point of there is veritable evidence about this great Hindu civilization. This civilization can be examined through several lenses. Let's examine it from the sort of lens of ideas and intellectual fervor that you write so wonderfully about, shorn of both exaggeration on one hand and obfuscation on the other that vested interests, for good or bad reasons, have often resorted to. Now, again, there's a lot in that chapter. It's a beautiful, dense, rich chapter. But just for the sake of the audience and just to give them a taste of it, could you give us a bird's eye view of what this ancient realm of ideas look like?
You see, there is one distinctive feature about Hindu civilization. And by the way, when I speak of its achievements, I don't wish to gloss over its principal blemishes, which also, if we have the time, I'll be more than happy to talk about. But about its achievements, I want to say it's an exceptionally cerebral civilization. There is the application of mind to things. Things don't happen happenstance as happenstance in the evolution of history. So there is a great deal of ideation. And it is for this reason that you have the sheer audacity of thought in the nature of the Upanishads. You have the three foundational texts of Hinduism: the Upanishads, the Brahma Sutra, the Bhagavad Gita. And the remarkable doctrine of the Bhagavad Gita, as much in the religious as in the secular realm, of Nishkam Karma. You have the six systems of Hindu philosophy. You have Buddhism and Jainism, which are offshoots of Hinduism, but which are great religions in their own right, and the great overlap between their ideas and that of Hinduism. You have a great deal of diversity, remarkable diversity. The Charvaks, for instance, the materialistic school, question even the sanctity of the Vedas, and yet they are part of Hinduism. You have esoteric schools like the Tantrics, whose practices are very different from mainstream Hinduism, and they are part of Hinduism. If you go beyond, then you have within the realm of spirituality and religion the remarkable tapestry between Nirgun and Sagun. Nirgun, the all powerful, all pervasive, omnipotent, omnipresent, cosmic entity called Brahm. Adrisht, Akhand, Achintya, undifferentiated consciousness, Nirvishesh Chinmatram, which pervades the cosmos. And we are that Brahm personified. Aham Brahmasmi, Ayam Atma Brahm. And on the other hand, we have the most extravagant humanization of the divine principle in the Sagun principle. And how do the two balance each other? It's a remarkable aspect of Hindu civilization. Foreigners are often mystified at the thousands of gods and deities and devtas and devis. They don't understand that essentially all is one, and this is the playful, joyous, extravagant manifestation in human comprehensible terms of that one great cosmic principle. Then, in the realm of ideas, you have, for instance, the great rasa theory. Unbelievable. According to Western thought, the word aesthetics was invented in the 17th century by one Joseph Addison. Actually, 600 years before the birth of Christ. We had Bharat in the Natya Shastra with an entire chapter on what constitutes the aesthetic experience, rasa. The Natya Shastra is not a compendium of the arts. It is a meditation on the aesthetic experience, rasa. Then you have the remarkable four purusharths, the almost Confucian notion of a balanced life with extreme application of mind, dharma, artha, kama, moksha. Then you have the four ashrams as to define a balanced, evolving human life. You have, in addition, a great deal of thought applied to political science. Kautilya wrote the Arthashastra, but he himself acknowledges that there were 6 schools of political science predating his writing of the Arthashastra on kingship, on governance, on people's rights, on the duties of a king. Then you have the remarkable achievements in the field of science, Aryabhat, Brahmagupta, the Pythagoras equation, centuries before Pythagoras. You have the zero, the invention of the zero, and much more in the field of science, astronomy, and mathematics. Then you have the achievements in the field of medicine. I mean, what I'm trying to say is, where does one stop? Yes, you have major blemishes also. For instance, the oppression of the caste system as it congealed sometime around the second century CE into a incorrigible, inflexible hierarchy with the exploitation and discrimination that it entailed. We need to fight that. Yes, there are questions of gender disparity, which incidentally were not there in the earlier phases of Hindu civilization. You had a lady like Gargi openly questioning King Janaka of Videha in an assembly and arguing with the foremost sage of that time, Yagnavalkya, on an almost equal footing. It's recorded in one of the Upanishads. And many more examples, including of strong women like Draupadi. Arthashastra says that women were given important positions in the administration. But we have a situation of gender disparity today, and it has been there for the last almost 2000 years. These are questions to ponder about. Therefore, I say that in the realm of ideas, Hinduism provides a remarkable uh, uh, saga which needs to be studied. I have only recounted a few of these. And what sometimes amazes me is the lack of curiosity, even indifference of Hindus themselves to their great heritage. It is a treasure house lying at their threshold. But because perhaps Hinduism does not have, it's a way of life, it does not have one prescriptive text, nor one mandatory ritual, nor one pope, nor one temple. Perhaps because of that, Hindus somehow feel that they are Hindus without feeling the urge or the need to know a little more about. And there were other causes also for this relative disjoint with our past, and that refers to the impact of colonialism. But I can talk about that later.
We'll come to that. We'll come to that. I mean, you gave us a wonderful overview of this realm of ideas and make a very good argument for why we need to delve into it in more detail, which your book does. You also talk a little bit about the blemishes. I would like to, it would be good if we could skip in history, and if you could talk a little bit more about this friction between these sort of radical, wonderful ideas, ideation, thought, and intellectual fervor on one hand, and the sort of strengthening of these kinds of regressive, of course, a modern term, but you get my gist, of values, systems that are coming up within Hinduism. And if you could locate this in the context of the advent of Islam and Islamic conquest, before we move on to colonialism, that would be great. And of course, I understand that Islamic conquest is an Islamic, the sort of impact of Islam is not homogeneous. It's not a monolith that we're talking about. So feel free to structure it as you will, but you get the gist of my question.
Well, Hinduism had evolved more or less as a relatively homogeneous civilization in continuity for millennia before the coming of Islam. The Turkic invaders were conquerors, and therefore all conquests bring plunder and loot and destruction in their wake very often. But in this case, the plunder and loot and destruction was perhaps more than any other conquest, at least in the experience and context of Hindu civilization. The Scythians had come in the past, the Greeks had come, the Bactrians had come, but never was there this level of destruction driven by religious hatred for the other and the belief that all non-believers are infidel. So I believe that this is a fact of history which should not be glossed over. We need to accept the facts of history, not to excavate the acrimonies of the past in the present, but to reconcile with history. It's important. And therefore, I chronicle some of this. The remarkable destruction of temples, of artifacts, of centers of learning, such as Nalanda, where when Bakhtiyar Khilji burnt it to the ground, the library itself burnt for months, about a year and a half. It was so rich in treatises. So this is the fact that needs to be acknowledged. There's no point in airbrushing history or glossing over historical facts. And it has been recorded independently by historians. Uh, for instance, Will Durant says that the Islamic conquest of India constitutes one of the darkest chapters in the annals of history. And it's a fact also. So we must acknowledge that. At the same time, we need to value that over a course of 600 years, there did develop a remarkable syncretic culture, drawing as a synthesis from the cultures of both the invaders and the indigenous culture, which we call our Ganga Jamuni Tehzeeb. That is something to be valued on its own. But it's very difficult to say either or. I mean, if you were, for instance, to take the khayal in classical music, which is a development influenced also by the footprints of Islam over the earlier traditions of Drupad in Indian classical music. It's a greatly enriching addition to the repertoire of Indian classical music. If you were to place it on one side of the weighing scale and on the other the destruction of Nalanda, you can't say, oh no, this is better, so that doesn't matter. You have to acknowledge that, accept history, reconcile with it, and then accept some of the positive consequences that may have also occurred as a result of this interaction. I refuse to subscribe to this theory, as some historians have tried to project over a period of time, that the Islamic invaders were only motivated by plunder. No, there was religious fanaticism as well. Nor do I buy the theory that the Ganga Jamuni Tehzeeb emerged overnight, that the invaders came almost in tourist buses, gave a little biryani to those whom they came to rule, we gave them puri halwa, and all automatically overnight a Ganga Jamuni Tehzeeb evolved. It didn't happen like that. It took 600 years. And what is the most remarkable aspect of the Islamic conquest was how Hinduism survived this onslaught. You have countries like Indonesia, where when Islam invaded in precisely 250 years, a largely Hindu and Buddhist nation became, in a majority sense, Islamic. It didn't happen in India. It didn't happen because Hinduism reinvented itself. Hinduism in the 600 years of Islamic rule evolved in a remarkably transformative way. And the one principal agent of that was the Bhakti movement, which led to the democratization of Hinduism. The remarkable output of this, where it became bottom up instead of top down, is something that needs to become a compulsory chapter of our histories. The poetry, the quality of the poetry in almost every Indian language, the relative marginalization of ritualism, of the priestly class, of the common forms of worship like kirtans, all of this led to, and chanting led to the democratization of Hinduism, and the collective outpouring was of a quality that not only made Hinduism survive, but is one of the most remarkable chapters of the survival of any religion and civilization in history. So these are aspects of the Islamic conquest that we must bear with.
So, moving on from 600 years that it took to develop what we now call our syncretic culture, and I use that term very loosely. I hope to, in fact, come back to this term later. Um, there, we have about 300 odd years of the British rule. And how would you say that measures up in a sort of comparative way with the Islamic period and the impact of the Islamic period on the Hindu civilization? What was colonialism's impact on our realm of ideas and our realm of spirituality and philosophy?
You see, colonialism was not only about the physical subjugation of a people. That, of course, was one of its aims. Colonialism was about the colonization of the mind. And perhaps few colonial empires were as spectacularly successful in this endeavor than the British. And so colonialism marked a consistent, researched critique of the civilization of those it had come to rule, with the sole aim of thereby contradistancing the civilization of the rulers and conveying the message that the rulers are rulers because they deserve to be, and the ruled are ruled because they deserve to be. That is the colonial critique and argument. And the unfortunate tragedy of it all was that it was so heavily internalized by, quote unquote, the natives themselves. So it's a battle where a great civilization, a great religion, now was compelled to look down upon itself, to be ashamed of some of its religious thoughts, to have their great civilizational pillars being reinterpreted. Some of them were important discoveries, and I pay full tribute to the Asiatic Society for the discovery of our own culture and civilization lost under the dust of time, including as a result of the Islamic conquest. But I mean, one example is that Kautilya's Arthashastra was lost. Can you imagine, until the 19th century, when one manuscript was discovered in as remote a place as Kerala? So much was lost. And so much was also partly recovered by the British, but it never replaced the colonial critique of the civilization of those they had come to rule. And that critique was internalized by the natives. And so that was the primary contribution of colonialism, and colonialism's shadow continues for much after they have left politically, and we are still battling with it.
So there is a sort of, there is colonialism, but as the independence movement gains ground, we have our own intellectual and political leaders who, of course, recognize this fact of this essential facet of colonialism, in which it's important to subjugate the mind and not just subjugate a people and a polity. That's also, pre-independence is also a period that's sort of rich in debate. There are lots of debates happening. There is Gandhi and Tagore, and there's Vivekananda, and there is Nehru, and there is Ambedkar. I mean, one can go on and on. But the nature of these debates is, of course, focused on a political end, which is independence, which is self-rule. Now, I'm curious to understand how the politics of that time, the political debates of those times, and the leaders who were at the helm, they shape our current, or perhaps in the new republic, our understanding of the Hindu civilization and how we relate to it.
Well, post-colonized societies have to reclaim their culture and civilization. Civilizations that are subjugated don't really write independent histories, nor do they have independent history. So you have to reclaim that. You have to free it from the biases of colonial rule. And I think that is an unfinished project. It's unfinished. For those who led us to political freedom, there were many who had themselves internalized the colonial critique, who looked at our past largely in terms of superstition, prejudice, obscurantism, and ritualism. In other words, the great refinements of the past, the valuable wisdoms of the past, the achievements in the secular realm, in the areas of audacity of thought, in philosophy and spirituality, somehow did not hold their attention because they were in a hurry to move to a new modernity, largely defined in Western terms. Now, this was unfortunate because with political freedom must also come the reclamation of culture, of being rooted again in your own soil, not in terms of xenophobia and chauvinism, but in terms of a legitimate, enlightened acceptance of your reclamation of your culture and civilization. It hasn't happened. It hasn't happened. It's not happened even now. And so it's work in progress, if at all. I think there was, for instance, I can only quote to you, I have great respect for Panditji. His portrait adorns my study, uh, uh, and I think he made a remarkable contribution in securing the future of the Republic in its fragile and foundational years. But Panditji himself admits to being partly a victim of the colonial critique. And then he writes that we have to get rid of the deadwood of the past, by which I sometimes feel he threw the baby out with the bathwater. There were things to be reformed about the past, and there was certainly superstition and prejudice and ritualism, but there was much more. But somehow he was impatient. He was impatient. Others of his generation were impatient to move on, to move on rapidly towards a new form of modernity, which was not a synthesis between the past and the present, which was not born out of that synthesis, but which was a radical rupture with the past. And to move on to that modernity defined largely in Western terms. The West was making waves for its scientific and technological progress, and India must somehow get rid of the shackles of the past and move on in that direction. And in that process, there came about, in a curious manner, a qualitative disdain for one of the most ancient civilizations of the world, and certainly an incomplete recovery of some of the wisdoms of its past.
My final question to you is this, that there is this moment that you're talking about. There's a new republic, there's impatience, like you said, where some of its leaders, prominent leaders, are concerned to get on with it, to kind of define modernity in borrowed terms and subscribe to it and sort of, emulate it within the country. But one could argue that that was a fool's errand, because it was not quite it was discordant with the people who we are and we were. In many ways, there are what has been happening over the last 10 years in the rise of what we call political Hindutva could be seen as a kind of counter-revolution, if you will, from the grassroots level, right? I mean, of course, it's not just grassroots, that's complicated, but broadly speaking. And there are those who will go to the extent of saying that the age of Narendra Modi is a sort of Hindu renaissance. I would really like to hear your views on this, and also take it forward to talk about what an actual Hindu renaissance might look like today.
Well, when people are not fully in enlightened categories rooted in their cultural past, there is distortion. Either it can be distortion in terms of juvenile overglorification, such as that of the Dinanath Batra school of interpreting Hindu civilization, where he says that there were aeroplanes in the past, that cars plied the streets, that there was plastic surgery, there was in vitro fertilization. uh, and that trivializes the genuine achievements of a great civilization. Uh, or sometimes there is, in the desire to, in the absence of knowledge, assert the supremacies of the past in the current context. There is another kind of distortion, which is the emergence of Ativad, the ultra right, the ultra Hindu right. And I think something of that kind has been encouraged today. The leadership of Hindu civilization and Hinduism appears to have gone into lumpen hands, which is a great tragedy for a cerebral civilization, a highly intelligent civilization, a nuanced civilization, a civilization delicate like filigree, I mean, a tapestry which has been woven over millennia. For it to go into lumpen hands, and how do you define those lumpen elements? A, their evangelism is in inverse proportion to their knowledge. They don't know, and therefore they are even more assertive, emphatic, and vociferous. They are averse, secondly, they are averse to dialogue and discussion, which is the great tradition of Shastrarth in Hindu civilization. I need hardly refer to you of the great Shastrarth between Adi Shankaracharya and Mandan Mishra. Everything is dialogic. The Upanishads are dialogic, the Bhagavad Gita is dialogic, the Brahma Sutra is dialogic, but they are averse to dialogue and discussion. Uh, they are uh, they are usually prone to violence. These lumpen elements. They are adept at taking the law in their own hands, encouraged by governments which they believe will condone what they are doing. They are orthodox. They are conservative, and this would be of importance to you. Pragya, they are patriarchal. Their approach to women is that they must uh, behave in certain manners which are acceptable to their patriarchal notions of correct behavior. Uh, they are all of this, and in my view, this is a great tragedy. I mean, they almost seem to commit the ultimate sacrilege of converting a religion and civilization like Hinduism into a Wahhabi faith, which is a true sacrilege. They want to tell people what to eat, what to drink, what to wear, how to behave, what to do, what not to do. And I think they're especially uh, dictatorial as far as women are concerned, deciding in their own conservative, patriarchal, upper caste minds what constitutes good behavior. So these are real dangers, and the violence associated with it, which is condoned, is worrisome. I mean, after 2010, 98% of cattle lynchings have taken place after 2014, uh, where 86% of the victims were Muslims, and you had uh, the majority of them occur in BJP ruled states, and those who perpetrated these crimes often made videos proclaiming their Hindutva credentials. Uh, in the after 2014 and 2019, there have been uh, majority governments, not a single elected Muslim minister, a Muslim candidate in the ruling party. This is certainly a first time for any triumphant electoral party. So these are worrisome. This whole basis of exclusion, of hatred, of bigotry, uh, these are worrisome for Hinduism, whose founding principles were not about cowardice, certainly not. There is a conquering eclecticism in Hinduism. There is that is why it is Sanatan. But Hinduism said, Ekam Satya Vipraha Bahuda Vadanti. The truth is one, wise people call it by different names. Hinduism had the courage to say, far back in the shadows of time, Ano Bhadra Kritavo Yantu Vishwata. Let good thoughts flow to me from all directions. It was our sages who had the audacity of thought to say, Udar Charitanam Vasudhaiv Kutumbakum. For the big-hearted, the entire world is your family. We come from these credentials. We have never been based on this kind of bigotry and exclusion. So these are very worrying things from my point of view because they distort Hinduism and Hindu civilization. Wherein lies the true renaissance? I believe Hinduism should be reclaimed by greater knowledge by its own followers. Knowledge of what this religion and civilization is about. That's the renaissance waiting to happen. Knowledge not for, as I said earlier, for xenophobia and chauvinism, but to know more about this great religion and its refinements and diversities. Until we know, we are cannon fodder in the hands who presume to know but do not know. So therefore, it's very important that knowledge becomes Jnanamarg. Satyam Jnanam Anantam Brahm. Let the path of knowledge lead to the great renaissance Hinduism is waiting for among its own followers. And secondly, Hinduism must definitely encourage a great deal of internal reform. We must fight the caste system. Whether it's Savarkar, who spoke greatly, who was an atheist, he spoke strongly and greatly against all against the caste system and its exploitation, oppression, and discrimination. Somehow his followers who applaud his Hindu Rashtra proclamation never follow this aspect of what he had to say. There was Swami Vivekananda, there was Gandhi, there was Dr. Ambedkar, there was Nehru, there was an entire phalanx of our leaders who gave the idea of India, who have asked for social reform within Hinduism, the caste system, and about gender equality. All of our great leaders have spoken. It is one of our great traditions. None of our gods are without their consorts. In fact, no other religion on mankind gives so much importance to the Devi. What happens in real life? We need to think about it. So these are the changes that must come for Hindu Renaissance, for real Hindu Renaissance. And therefore I say the Hindutva needs to be replaced by Hindu Satya.
May what you say be heeded. Pavan, you spoke so well about what is worrisome in terms of what's going on right now. To my mind, in addition to that, what's also worrisome and what makes me apprehensive is that the resistance to political Hindutva and its lumpen elements is also in many ways rooted not within our own culture and civilizational history and understanding, but in sort of many Western ideas of what liberalism might look like. And therefore, and I say this because that is the reason why books like this are so very important. And thank you for writing it. I can only hope that everybody is going to buy a copy and read it and then make up their own minds about where we stand in history and who we really are. Thank you for speaking with me, Pavan. Thank you everyone who's listening, and thank you once again, Oxford Bookstores.
Great pleasure.
Thank you.